Rome, 73 BC. Marble columns and whispered secrets. Livia Valeria hasn't spoken a word in 3 years, not since the night imperial guards dragged her brother away. Daughter of Senator Valerius, she moves like a ghost through her father's villa, her silence a fortress no tutor or suitor can breach. Meanwhile, in the blood-soaked sand of the Colosseum, Atticus earns his freedom with one final, brutal victory. His body bears the map of his survival, a network of scars that tells stories he never speaks aloud. When street violence erupts across the city, the senator hires this scarred gladiator as temporary protection for his household. 2 souls bound by silence in a world that demands noise. Will her first words in years be to save the man who never asked her to speak? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Dawn broke over the 7 hills of Rome, casting long shadows across Senator Gaius Valerius's villa on the Palatine. Marble columns gleamed golden in the early light as slaves moved silently through the peristylium, careful not to disturb the morning stillness. The household awakened with practiced precision, water drawn from the cistern, braziers lit against the spring chill, offerings made to the household gods at the lararium. In her private chamber, Livia Valeria sat motionless before a polished bronze mirror while her handmaiden, Casia, arranged her dark hair in the simple style befitting an unmarried woman of noble birth. The writing tablets resting beside her, thin wooden boards coated with wax, were her voice now. 3 years of silence had taught the household to read her gestures, her expressions, the careful words she etched with her stylus when necessary. Your Greek tutor arrives within the hour, Domina, Casia murmured, sliding a bone pin into place. Shall I bring your breakfast here or in the garden? Livia's slender fingers reached for the tablet. With practiced strokes, she wrote, *garden. Leave me when he arrives, *. Across the atrium, Senator Valerius received morning clients in his tablinum, the weight of Rome's politics evident in the deep lines of his face. At 58, he had survived 3 emperors and countless Senate intrigues. The recent slave rebellions had unsettled the Republic, though Spartacus was finally defeated. Still, unrest simmered beneath Rome's orderly surface. The Cornelius family has expressed interest, said Marcus Tullius, the senator's nephew, a young man with political ambitions that outpaced his abilities. Their youngest son needs a wife of proper lineage. The alliance would strengthen our position considerably. And what of Livia's condition? The senator asked, voice lowered. Marcus waved dismissively. A silent wife might be considered a blessing by some. Besides, once married, perhaps she'll find reason to speak again. The senator frowned. My daughter is not a piece of property to be exchanged for political favor, Marcus. With respect, uncle, she is exactly that. As are we all in Rome's great game. In the garden, Livia sat beneath a fig tree, sunlight dappling her simple stola. The writing tablets rested in her lap as she watched a sparrow bathe in the small fountain. She had not always been silent. Once, her voice had filled these gardens with recitations of Sappho and Homer, with laughter and questions that exasperated her tutors. The Greek tutor arrived precisely at the appointed hour, his frustration evident before the lesson even began. 4 months, he had attempted to engage the senator's daughter in philosophical discourse, only to receive written responses or blank stares. Today we shall discuss Aristotle's views on virtue, he announced, unrolling a scroll. Perhaps you might read this passage aloud? Livia's dark eyes met his, unflinching but resolute. Her fingers tightened around her stylus. Very well, he sighed after the silence stretched between them. Write your thoughts on this passage, then. When the lesson ended an hour later, the tutor gathered his scrolls with barely concealed irritation. Senator, he said, finding Valerius in the atrium, I cannot continue these lessons. Your daughter's mind is keen, her written responses show that clearly, but I cannot teach properly when my student refuses to engage in dialogue. The senator nodded wearily. Another tutor lost to his daughter's silence. You'll receive full payment for the month. As the tutor departed, Marcus approached, a calculated smile on his youthful face. Another failure. Perhaps this is a sign that it's time to focus on her marriage rather than her education. The Cornelius family doesn't require a philosopher for a daughter-in-law, just a noble womb to bear sons. The senator's hand tightened around his writing stylus until it nearly snapped. Enough, Marcus. Arrangements will be made in due time. From her place in the garden, Livia could not hear their words, but she recognized the familiar pattern of their conversation. Her fingers traced the smooth surface of her writing tablets, her prison and her protection both. Within their waxen surface lay the only voice she permitted herself now, blood and sand. These were the constants of Atticus's life for 7 years. The roar of the crowd rose around him like a physical force as he circled his opponent in the arena. This fight would be his last, win or die. Freedom or oblivion. The other gladiator was a massive Gaul, blonde and bearded, wielding a heavy sword with practiced ease. Atticus had seen him kill 3 men in previous games. The crowd favored the Gaul, chanting for the blood of the Thracian fighter with the scarred face. Atticus breathed steadily, the way his first trainer had taught him. In through the nose, out through the mouth. The noise of 20,000 Romans faded to a distant rumble. There was only the sand beneath his feet, the weight of his curved Sicca blade, and the man who stood between him and freedom. The Gaul charged, sword raised high. Atticus sidestepped, feeling the blade whistle past his ear. Years of training guided his movements, not thinking, just reacting. The fight became a dance of steel and sweat, of feints and counters. Blood poured from a wound in Atticus's shoulder, but he barely felt it. When the opening came, the Gaul overextending on a thrust, Atticus moved with deadly precision. His Sicca found the gap between breastplate and shoulder guard. The Gaul's eyes widened in surprise more than pain. As his opponent fell to his knees, Atticus looked to the imperial box. The editor of the games raised his hand, waiting for the crowd's verdict. Thumbs turned down across the Colosseum, death for the defeated. But the editor hesitated, then raised his thumb. Impressed by the Gaul's courage, he granted mercy. With the Gaul's life spared, Atticus was summoned before the editor's box. His disbelief, he was presented with the rudis, a wooden sword symbolizing his freedom. After 7 years, 112 fights, and more scars than he could count, Atticus was no longer property. "You fought well, Thracian," said Quintus Lentulus Batiatus, the lanista who had owned him. "The crowds will miss your skill." "The crowds can find another man to die for their entertainment," Atticus replied, his voice rough from disuse. Gladiators spoke little, their bodies communicated everything necessary in the arena. Batiatus laughed without humor. "What will you do with your freedom, I wonder? Rome has little use for foreign ex-gladiators except as bodyguards or laborers." Atticus looked down at the wooden sword in his hand. It was light, almost weightless compared to the weapons he had wielded in combat. "I will find my way." The lanista tossed him a small purse. "Your winnings. It won't last long in this city." That night, Atticus slept under the open sky for the first time in 7 years. The inn was too expensive, too confining after so long in the gladiator barracks. He found a quiet corner in a temple portico, his meager possessions, the wooden rudis, the coin purse, and a small knife, tucked beneath his simple tunic. Freedom tasted strange on his tongue. No one told him when to wake, what to eat, when to train. The scars that mapped his body, a latticework of pale lines across his chest, arms, and face, were the only evidence of his former life. Each told a story, the jagged line across his cheek from a Samnite's trident, the puncture on his thigh from a Dimachorus fighter, the burn mark on his shoulder from training accidents. Morning found him wandering the forum, watching Rome awaken. Street vendors called their wares, patricians hurried past with slaves in tow, and everywhere there was noise, endless, chaotic noise after the regimented life of the ludus. "Fighter!" The voice came from behind him, patrician and commanding. Atticus turned. A wealthy Roman in a toga with a purple stripe stood flanked by 2 household slaves. "How did you know?" Atticus asked, his accent still heavy despite years in Rome. The man gestured to Atticus's forearm, where the mark of Batiatus's ludus was branded. "I recognize the mark. And you move like a fighter, even in these crowded streets. Are you seeking employment? Atticus considered the man carefully. Perhaps. I am Titus Aelius Nepos. I require additional security for my household. Recent unrest in the city has made certain elements bold. A former gladiator would discourage trouble. Atticus felt the weight of the wooden rudis tucked into his belt. Freedom meant little without means to sustain it. What is your offer? Rome simmered with tension that spring. The defeat of Spartacus had not ended the unrest that plagued the Republic. 6,000 crucified slaves lined the Appian Way as a warning, their bodies left to rot in the sun. But the brutal display had only driven sympathizers underground, creating an invisible network of dissidents who whispered of freedom in taverns and back alleys. In the Forum, Senator Valerius watched a grain merchant argue with desperate citizens. The man's cart had been nearly overturned, his scales knocked to the ground. The Senate promises grain, but where is it? Shouted a thin woman with a child on her hip. My family hasn't eaten in 2 days. The merchant raised his hands defensively. I don't set the prices. Take your complaints to your noble senators. Several heads turned toward Valerius, recognizing his toga praetexta with its purple stripe. He quickened his pace, his personal slave Demetrius close behind. The situation worsens, Dominus, Demetrius murmured. 3 warehouses were looted near the Aventine last night. The Senate meets this afternoon to address the grain shortage, Valerius replied. Pompeius claims shipments from Sicily will arrive within the week. And if they don't? The senator didn't answer. Both men knew what hunger could drive people to do. As they passed the temple of Castor and Pollux, a commotion erupted. A group of young plebeians surrounded a small vegetable cart, shoving the elderly vendor to the ground. Guards moved in swiftly, clubs raised, but not before the cart was overturned, precious onions and cabbages trampled in the dirt. This is the 3rd such incident this week, said a voice beside Valerius. Senator Quintus Cornelius, his potential son-in-law's father, stood watching the scene with distaste. The mob grows bolder. Hunger makes men desperate, Valerius replied. Indeed. And these disturbances make me concerned about our family's discussions. Cornelius smoothed his immaculate toga. My son requires a stable household, not one vulnerable to the city's chaos. Valerius stiffened. The Valerii have stood on the Palatine for 4 generations. We are hardly vulnerable. Of course. Cornelius's smile didn't reach his eyes. But these are unusual times. I hear you've lost another tutor for your daughter? News travels quickly. Rome thrives on whispers, my friend. Cornelius leaned closer. There are also whispers that your former household remains sympathetic to certain rebellious elements. Given your son's unfortunate situation. Valerius's face hardened. My son was falsely accused, and my household's loyalty is beyond question. Naturally. Still, perhaps additional security would not go amiss. For your daughter's protection, if nothing else. Inside the Senate House later that afternoon, debates raged over the proper response to civil unrest. The more conservative faction called for increased military presence in the city. Others argued that only addressing the grain shortage would calm the populace. The root cause is Spartacus, declared Senator Crassus, who had finally defeated the slave rebellion months earlier. His poison spreads even after his death. We must root out any remaining sympathizers. Marcus Tullius, attending as his uncle's secretary, leaned forward eagerly. Though not yet a senator himself, he had ambitions far beyond his years. Perhaps a special investigative body, he suggested to the older man beside him, to identify threats within the city. When Valerius returned home that evening, he found Marcus already there, speaking intently with the household steward. Uncle, Marcus greeted him, I've taken the liberty of making inquiries about additional guards for the household. The streets grow more dangerous daily. I am capable of managing my own security, Valerius replied coolly. Of course, but I heard something interesting today. The gladiator who won his freedom in yesterday's games, a Thracian called Atticus, has been hired by Titus Aelius. Apparently he's quite formidable. A gladiator? In my household. Former gladiator, Marcus corrected. And better a proven fighter than some untested youth. These are not normal times, Uncle. Livia. Safety should be our primary concern. Valerius gazed across the atrium toward the garden where his daughter sat writing by the fountain. Silent, vulnerable Livia. The last of his bloodline if his son never returned from exile. Perhaps Marcus was right about one thing. Her safety was paramount. Make the arrangements, he said finally. But he answers to me alone, not you. Atticus arrived at the Valerius villa as dawn broke over the Palatine Hill. The household steward, a severe man named Gallius, received him at the service entrance with thinly veiled disdain. You'll report to Rufus, our head of security, Gallius explained, leading Atticus through the servants' quarters. The senator requires additional protection, particularly for his daughter. You are not to enter the family quarters unless specifically instructed. For household guards lounged in a small courtyard, rising warily as Atticus approached. Their leader, a stocky veteran with a scar across his nose, looked the former gladiator up and down. So you're the arena fighter, Rufus said. I served 10 years in the legions before coming here. Real fighting, not that theatrical nonsense. Atticus said nothing, recognizing the challenge for what it was. Hierarchy established through intimidation, no different from his first days at the Ludus. The senator wishes to see you, Gallius interrupted. Make yourself presentable. In the tablinum, the senator's office, Atticus stood at attention while Valerius studied him from behind a massive cedar desk. The nobleman's eyes lingered on the prominent scar that ran from Atticus's left temple to his jaw. Your previous employer speaks highly of your discipline, Valerius said finally. He says you're not given to drinking or troublemaking like many of your kind. I'm no longer my kind, Dominus, Atticus replied evenly. I am a freedman. A flicker of surprise crossed the senator's face. Indeed. Well, freedman, your primary duty is the protection of this household, with particular attention to my daughter, Livia. The young domina requires special protection? Valerius's expression tightened. My daughter is unwell. She does not speak, has not for 3 years. She is vulnerable, and there are those who might use that vulnerability against our family. Atticus nodded, keeping his face impassive. A mute girl in a city that thrived on words and rhetoric, she would be considered damaged goods in Roman society, regardless of her father's position. She spends much of her time in the Peristylium garden, Valerius continued. You'll maintain a respectful distance but remain within sight. Under no circumstances are you to be alone with her. Is that understood? Perfectly, Dominus. After receiving his instructions from Rufus, patrol rotations, entry points to guard, emergency protocols, Atticus was shown to a small room near the servants' quarters. It was sparse but private, a luxury he hadn't known in years. That afternoon, Atticus caught his first glimpse of Livia Valeria. She sat beneath a blooming almond tree in the Peristylium, a writing tablet on her lap and a small pruning knife in her hand as she carefully trimmed dead blooms from potted herbs. Her dark hair was arranged simply, her stola the muted blue of an unmarried noblewoman. From his position by the colonnade, Atticus observed her methodical movements, the careful precision with which she collected the trimmed stems in a small basket. She was not what he had expected, not a cowering, fragile creature, but composed and self-contained. A sudden commotion drew his attention skyward. A flock of startled doves took flight from the roof tiles, dislodging a loose section of decorative terracotta. Before he could shout a warning, the heavy piece broke free, plummeting toward the garden, toward Livia. Atticus moved without thinking, crossing the garden in 3 long strides. He reached her just as the terracotta crashed down, shoving her sideways and raising his arm to shield them both. The fragment shattered against his forearm, sending shards skittering across the mosaic floor. For one suspended moment, he found himself staring directly into her eyes, dark and wide with surprise but not fear. Something in that gaze reminded him of his own reflection the first time he'd seen himself after gaining his freedom. Wary, watchful, waiting. Then awareness of their position crashed over him. A former gladiator, a slave, touching a senator's daughter. He released her immediately and stepped back, eyes lowered. "Forgive me, Domina. You were in danger." He expected outrage, perhaps a silent summons for guards. Instead, when he dared look up, Livia was studying him with undisguised curiosity. Her gaze traveled to his arm where blood seeped from a gash left by the terracotta, then to the pruning shears that had fallen nearby. With deliberate movements, she retrieved her writing tablet and stylus. After a moment, she turned the wax surface toward him. In elegant script, 2 words, "Gratias tibi." "Thank you." Before he could respond, the garden erupted with activity as slaves and guards rushed in, drawn by the noise. Rufus pushed Atticus aside, checking Livia for injuries, while Gallius demanded an explanation. From the edge of the garden, a young nobleman watched the scene with narrowed eyes, the first time Atticus noticed Marcus Tullius's presence. Dawn had barely broken when Atticus began his morning routine in the small courtyard near the servants' quarters. The rhythm of training was embedded in his muscles after years in the ludus, a series of movements designed to maintain strength and reflexes. The sword he used was wooden, similar to his rudis but weighted to match the heft of a real blade. He moved through the forms with practiced precision, his breathing controlled and steady. In through the nose, out through the mouth. The discipline of breath had saved his life countless times in the arena. When the mind panicked, the breath remained. On his 3rd morning at the villa, Atticus became aware of eyes watching him. Glancing toward the colonnade, he caught a glimpse of blue fabric quickly withdrawing behind a column. The senator's daughter had been observing his training. The next morning, she was there again, no longer hiding but standing openly by the peristylium entrance. Her handmaiden, Casia, hovered anxiously nearby as Livia watched Atticus move through his exercises. When he finished and acknowledged her with the respectful nod, she didn't retreat. Instead, she approached the small table where Atticus had placed his water skin and a cloth to wipe away sweat. From a fold in her stola, she produced a pomegranate and set it beside his belongings before withdrawing to a marble bench several paces away, her writing tablet in her lap. Atticus picked up the fruit, feeling its weight in his palm. In Thrace, pomegranates symbolized both death and rebirth, the fruit of the underworld and of spring's return. He wondered if the Roman girl knew this or if the gesture was merely one of simple kindness. With deliberate movements, he drew his knife and split the pomegranate in half, revealing the ruby seeds within. Rather than taking both halves for himself, he returned to where Livia sat and offered her one portion, placed carefully on the cloth to protect her hands from the juice. She looked up, surprise evident in her expression. For a moment, he thought she might refuse, but then she accepted the half-fruit with a slight nod. Casia, watching from a respectful distance, whispered something to another slave passing by. They ate in silence, the sweet tart seeds a small luxury in the early morning quiet. When finished, Atticus gathered the rinds to discard them, but Livia stopped him with a gesture. On her tablet she wrote, "Asterisk for the garden. Good for the soil, asterisk." Their routine developed naturally over the following days. Atticus would complete his morning training, and Livia would appear with some small offering, fresh figs, a handful of walnuts, once even a portion of honeycomb wrapped in vine leaves. They would share the food in companionable silence, occasionally communicating through her writing tablet. The household staff whispered about the strange friendship forming between the mute noblewoman and the scarred gladiator. Rufus warned Atticus to maintain his distance. The senator wouldn't approve of such familiarity, he cautioned. Your job is protection, not companionship. But Atticus saw no harm in their silent exchanges. Livia never tried to speak, never crossed the boundaries of propriety. There was simply a recognition between them, two people who understood the value of silence in a world that prized endless talking. On the 10th morning, their ritual was interrupted by the arrival of Marcus Tullius. He strode into the courtyard just as Livia was sharing a small loaf of honeyed bread with Atticus. "Cousin," Marcus greeted her, his smile not reaching his eyes. "I see you found a new diversion." Livia's face remained impassive, but her fingers tightened around her stylus. "Tell me, Gladiator," Marcus turned to Atticus, "do you make a habit of accepting gifts from your betters?" Or is my cousin a special case? Before Atticus could respond, Livia had written something on her tablet and thrust it toward her cousin. Marcus read it, his expression darkening. Hospitality is one thing, Livia. Inappropriate attention is quite another. He turned to Kasia. Your mistress should be preparing for her music lesson, not lingering in the servants' area. As Livia was led away, her face as composed as ever, Marcus stepped closer to Atticus. Remember your place, Thracian. She is promised to the Cornelius family, a political alliance worth more than you could earn in 10 lifetimes. Whatever game you're playing ends now. Atticus met his gaze steadily. There is no game, Dominus. The young Domina brings food, and we share it in silence. Nothing more. See that it remains nothing more, Marcus replied. My uncle was generous to give you a position here. That generosity can be withdrawn as easily as it was granted. After Marcus departed, Atticus found the half-eaten pomegranate from that morning discarded in the dust, its red seeds crushed underfoot like drops of blood. The Valerius atrium buzzed with activity as slaves prepared for important visitors. Mosaic floors were scrubbed until they gleamed, silver platters polished to mirror brightness, and fresh flowers arranged in alabaster vases. Senator Valerius paced the tablinum, reviewing notes for the upcoming negotiation while his secretary struggled to keep pace. The Cornelii will expect a substantial dowry, the secretary advised. Their family's influence has grown considerably since their shipping ventures in Alexandria proved successful. The Valerii have never been found wanting in matters of generosity, the senator replied stiffly. The land holdings in Campania should satisfy their requirements. In her chambers, Livia sat motionless as Kasia arranged her hair in an elaborate style befitting the occasion. She had worn her simplest tunics since her brother's exile, as if luxury itself had become distasteful. Today, however, her father had insisted on proper appearance. You look beautiful, Domina, Kasia murmured, securing a pearl-tipped pin. The young Master Cornelius will be most impressed. Livia's eyes flickered to her writing tablet, but she made no move to respond. What was there to say? That she had no interest in impressing anyone? That marriage to a stranger seemed like another form of exile? Outside her door, she heard Marcus's voice speaking with her father. The contract terms are favorable, uncle. The Cornelii ask only that the wedding take place before the autumn equinox. So soon? Livia needs time to prepare. Time for what? To continue her silence? To further embarrass the family? The sooner she is established in a proper household, the better for everyone. Livia closed her eyes, letting their voices wash over her like waves. She had long ago learned that men would decide her fate regardless of her wishes. Her only power lay in her silence, the one thing they could not take from her. A commotion at the villa's entrance announced the Cornelii's arrival. From her window, Livia watched as Lucius Cornelius and his son Gaius descended from their litter, accompanied by an entourage of slaves and clients. The elder Cornelius was corpulent and red-faced, the son, thin and nervous-looking with darting eyes. Atticus stood at attention near the entrance, his scarred face impassive as the distinguished guests passed. Only Livia noticed how his gaze followed her as she was summoned to the atrium to meet her potential husband. The formal introduction was mercifully brief. Gaius Cornelius barely looked at her, his attention fixed on the artworks decorating the atrium, calculating their value, no doubt. His father spoke for him, discussing Livia's attributes as if she were a prized mare. We understand the girl's condition, Lucius said delicately. But her bloodline is impeccable, and our soothsayer assures us she will bear strong sons. Senator Valerius's jaw tightened. My daughter's health is excellent. Her silence is temporary, a response to difficult circumstances. Of course, Lucius waved dismissively. Shall we discuss the particulars in private? As the men retreated to the tablinum, Livia was left with Gaius in the awkward company of slaves and attendants. After several attempts at one-sided conversation, he wandered off to examine a marble bust, leaving Livia seated alone by the impluvium. A slave appeared with refreshments, a tray of wine and honeyed cakes. Livia recognized him as Demetrius, her father's most trusted servant. As he offered the tray, he discreetly slipped a folded wax tablet beneath her napkin. When certain no one was watching, Livia unfolded the tablet. Inside was a message not in her father's hand, but one she had come to recognize from her morning exchanges. Asterisk courage, Domina. Not all cages are permanent. Asterisk. She looked up, scanning the atrium, and caught Atticus's eye momentarily before he resumed his guard position. A small, unexpected warmth bloomed in her chest, the first she had felt in 3 years. In the tablinum, voices rose as negotiations continued. Through the curtained doorway, Livia could see Marcus leaning close to her father, clearly advocating for the marriage. A sealed scroll passed between the men, the formal marriage proposal with its legal terms and conditions. The ceremony can take place within 30 days, Marcus announced as they returned to the atrium. A modest affair, given the family's recent difficulties. Livia's fingers closed around the small tablet hidden in the folds of her stola. Her father avoided her gaze as Lucius Cornelius raised a toast to the impending union. To new alliances, the corpulent man proclaimed. And to silence, a most underrated virtue in a wife. The men laughed, except for Senator Valerius, who merely forced a tight smile. From his position by the door, Atticus's expression remained unreadable, but his eyes never left Livia's face. Night fell over the Valerius villa, bringing with it an uneasy quiet. The household slaves had retired to their quarters, and only the night guards remained on duty. In her chamber, Livia lay awake, the day's events replaying in her mind. The marriage contract had been formalized, 30 days until she would become Gaius Cornelius's wife, 30 days until she would leave her father's house forever. Sleep eluded her, her thoughts churning like storm-tossed waves. Near midnight, a nightmare jolted her upright, the same one that had haunted her for 3 years. Imperial guards dragging her brother away, her screams unheard, her pleas ignored. She gasped for breath, clutching her blanket as panic closed her throat. A soft knock at her door startled her. Kasia entered, concern etched on her features. Another dream, Domina? I heard you crying out. Livia nodded, embarrassed. She hadn't realized she'd made a sound. Would you like some honeyed wine to help you sleep? Livia shook her head, then reached for her writing tablet. Asterisk air. Garden, asterisk. Kasia frowned. It's the middle of the night, Domina. It wouldn't be proper. Asterisk please. Just for a moment, asterisk. The slave sighed, then nodded. I'll fetch your palla. And I'll accompany you. The garden was transformed by moonlight, the familiar shapes of statues and plants rendered mysterious in silver and shadow. Livia breathed deeply, feeling the panic slowly recede as the night air filled her lungs. They sat on a marble bench near the small fountain, its gentle burbling the only sound. Movement near the colonnade caught her attention. Atticus emerged from the shadows, clearly surprised to find the garden occupied. He bowed slightly. Forgive me, Domina. I didn't mean to disturb you. Kasia rose immediately, positioning herself protectively near Livia. The Domina needed fresh air. We'll be returning to her chambers shortly. Atticus nodded, preparing to retreat, but Livia quickly wrote on her tablet and showed it to Kasia. Ask him why he's here. Reluctantly, Kasia translated. My mistress wishes to know what brings you to the garden at this hour. I'm assigned to night patrol this week, he explained. And he hesitated, then continued, the sound of the fountain helps me sleep between rounds. It reminds me of the stream near my village in Thrace. Livia wrote again, asterisk the nightmares. Ask if he has them too, asterisk. Kasia's eyes widened at the improper question, but dutifully asked, the Domina wishes to know if you suffer from bad dreams. Surprise flickered across Atticus's scarred face. Yes, he admitted. Most men who have seen battle or the arena do. Did I speak in my sleep? Livia shook her head and wrote, asterisk I have them too. How do you make them stop? Asterisk. When Kasia translated, Atticus's expression softened. He approached cautiously, maintaining a respectful distance. With your permission, Domina, I could show you. Kasia began to protest, but Livia silenced her with a gesture. She nodded to Atticus. In the ludus, he explained. "We were taught to control our breathing before a fight. Fear can kill you faster than any opponent if you let it rule your breath." He demonstrated, placing one hand on his diaphragm. "Breathe in through your nose for 4 counts, hold for 7, then out through your mouth for 8. The counting occupies the mind, and the pattern calms the body." Livia mimicked his actions, placing her hand below her ribs. "Yes, like that," he encouraged. "Again, but slower this time." They practiced together in the moonlit garden, the nobleman's daughter and the former gladiator, united by the simple act of breathing. After several minutes, Livia felt a profound calm settle over her. Her eyelids grew heavy, the tension in her shoulders releasing. Kasia, who had watched the entire exchange with increasing alarm, finally spoke. "The domina should return to her chambers now." "It's late." Livia nodded, suddenly aware of the impropriety of the situation. As she rose to leave, she impulsively reached for her tablet one last time. Gratius. "Will you be in the garden tomorrow night?" Atticus read her message and glanced at Kasia, who was pretending not to notice the exchange. "If the domina finds the breathing exercises helpful, I will be on night patrol for the next 7 days." As Livia and Kasia departed, Atticus remained by the fountain. From a hidden alcove near the kitchen entrance, a figure stepped out of the shadows. Marcus Tullius, his face unreadable in the darkness. He had witnessed the entire exchange, the bronze oil lamp in his hand casting sinister shadows across the garden. "Interesting," he murmured to himself. "Very interesting indeed." Morning sun filtered through the peristylum columns as Atticus completed his patrol. 7 days had passed since he'd begun teaching Livia the breathing techniques, 7 nights of brief, moonlit encounters by the fountain. Always with Kasia present, always proper despite the unusual circumstances. The nightmares that had plagued them both seemed to retreat, if only temporarily. As he crossed the garden, his foot struck something partially buried in the soft earth near a rosemary bush. Kneeling, he brushed away the soil to reveal a small wooden toy soldier, crudely carved but painted with careful detail in the colors of a Roman officer. The figurine was weathered, clearly having spent many seasons beneath the open sky. "That belonged to her brother," said a quiet voice behind him. Demetrius, the senator's personal slave, approached with caution. "Quintus Valerius. He and the domina would play war games in this garden when they were children." Atticus turned the toy soldier over in his palm. "What happened to him?" Demetrius glanced around to ensure they weren't overheard. 3 years ago, he was accused of sympathizing with slave rebels. Some letters were discovered, correspondence with known Spartacus supporters. He claimed they were forgeries, but evidence was overwhelming. "And he was executed?" Atticus asked, thinking of the 6,000 crucified along the Appian Way. "No. The senator's influence saved him from that fate. He was exiled to Rhodes instead, his citizenship revoked. The young domina witnessed his arrest, imperial guards dragging him from this very garden during her birthday celebration." Demetrius's voice lowered further. She screamed for them to stop, begged her father to intervene. When no one listened, she simply stopped speaking. That very night. Hasn't said a word since. Atticus stared down at the tiny soldier. She believes he was innocent? She knows it. They were as close as twins despite their age difference. Some in the household whisper that Marcus Tullius might have been involved in the forgeries. He had much to gain from Quintus's removal. What does she write about him? In her tablets? Nothing. Not a single word about her brother since that day. It's as if the pain is too great to acknowledge, even in writing. Later that afternoon, Atticus found Livia in her usual place beneath the almond tree. Her writing tablet lay unused in her lap as she stared into the distance, lost in thought. Taking a risk, he approached and held out his hand, revealing the toy soldier. Her reaction was immediate, a sharp intake of breath, eyes widening in recognition. Her hands trembled as she took the figurine, fingers tracing its familiar contours. For a moment, Atticus thought she might cry, but instead, she clutched the toy to her chest, eyes closed in silent communion with her memories. When she finally reached for her tablet, her message was direct. Where did you find this? Near the rosemary bush, Atticus replied. It was half buried. We played there. Quintus would hide his soldiers for me to find. Her stylus hesitated, then continued. They took him on my birthday. I was 17. I know, Atticus said gently. Demetrius told me. Her dark eyes studied him intently. You believe he was innocent? The question was dangerous, treasonous even. To suggest that imperial justice had erred was to invite the same fate that had befallen her brother. But looking into Livia's eyes, Atticus couldn't bring himself to offer platitudes. I believe that power often serves itself first, and justice second, he said carefully. In Thrace, I saw innocent villages burned because one man defied Rome. In the arena, I saw men die for entertainment. The world is seldom fair, Domina. He wrote to me once. From Rhodes. The letter arrived 6 months after he left. Her writing grew more urgent. He said someone close to our family had betrayed him. That I should trust no one. Then nothing more. 3 winters with no word. Atticus thought of Marcus Tullius watching them in the garden, of the convenient marriage arrangement with the Cornelius family, of the politics that swirled around the senator's household like invisible currents. I've never shown anyone this, Livia wrote, reaching into a hidden pocket sewn into her stola. She withdrew a small scroll, tightly rolled and sealed with wax. His letter. I keep it with me always. It's not safe to speak of these things here, Atticus warned, acutely aware of how many ears the villa walls possessed. Your cousin is ambitious, she completed the thought in writing. And my marriage to Gaius Cornelius benefits him greatly. With me gone, he becomes my father's heir, Understanding dawned in Atticus's eyes. And if your brother were to return, Marcus would lose everything. Shouts erupted from the Forum Romanum, echoing through the narrow streets of the Palatine. Senator Valerius had departed early that morning for an emergency Senate session called to address the growing unrest. By midday, rumors spread of violent clashes between hungry citizens and grain merchants. From the villa's upper terrace, Atticus watched plumes of smoke rise from the direction of the Subura district. The unrest was spreading. Rufus gathered the household guards, distributing additional weapons and positioning men at all entrances. The senator should have returned by now, Rufus muttered, scanning the approach to the villa. The streets aren't safe. Should we send men to find him? Atticus suggested. Rufus shook his head. Orders are to protect the household, especially the domina. We stay here. As afternoon waned with no sign of Senator Valerius, anxiety spread through the villa. Slaves whispered in corners, and even Marcus Tullius, who had arrived seeking shelter from the chaos, paced the atrium with uncharacteristic agitation. This is Crassus's doing, Marcus complained to anyone who would listen. His heavy-handed response to the grain protesters has inflamed the situation. Now the entire city suffers. Livia remained in her chambers, but Atticus could sense her worry. Twice he caught her watching from her window, searching the street for signs of her father's return. When darkness fell and the senator still hadn't appeared, Atticus approached Rufus again. Let me go look for him. I know the city, and I can move through crowds unnoticed. I'm not wearing household livery. The senator gave explicit instructions. To protect his household, Atticus interrupted. He is part of that household. And his daughter needs him safe. Rufus hesitated, then nodded grudgingly. Take Titus with you. He knows which taverns the senator frequents after Senate meetings. I move faster alone, Atticus countered. If the senator is in trouble, 2 men can extract him more easily than 1. Fine. You have until midnight. After that, we seal the villa completely until morning. Atticus slipped into the darkening streets, the smoke thicker now, carrying the acrid smell of burning wood and cloth. He moved swiftly through back alleys, avoiding the main thoroughfares where the worst of the violence concentrated. Twice he encountered roving groups of young men armed with clubs, but his gladiator's bearing and scarred visage discouraged them from approaching. The Senate house stood empty when he reached it, its marble steps littered with broken pottery and trampled produce from overturned market stalls. A clerk locking the doors informed him that most senators had departed hours ago, seeking safety in their villas or country estates. "Senator Valerius?" Atticus asked. Was he among them? The old man with the limp? He left with Senator Cornelius and 2 others. They were headed toward the temple of Castor and Pollux, something about meeting with grain merchants to negotiate emergency imports. The temple area was chaos when Atticus arrived. A mob surrounded several wealthy-looking men, shouting accusations of hoarding and price gouging. At the center of the crowd, Atticus glimpsed Senator Valerius's distinctive silver hair. The elderly man was on the ground, blood visible on his temple, while several other patricians huddled against a temple column, protected by a thin line of public guards. Without hesitation, Atticus pushed through the crowd, using his size and battle-hardened presence to create a path. When a young plebeian attempted to block him, Atticus simply lifted the man aside with one powerful arm. "Let me through," he growled. "I'm not here for trouble." He reached the senator's side and knelt beside him. Valerius was conscious but dazed, a gash on his forehead bleeding freely. "Gladiator," the old man murmured in confusion. "What are you doing here?" "Getting you home, Dominus." Atticus helped him to his feet, supporting his weight. To the surrounding mob, he called out, "This man has argued for fair grain prices in the Senate. His daughter feeds orphans in the Suitor weekly. Would you harm one of the few patricians who remembers the common people?" It was a calculated risk. Atticus had no idea if any of it was true. But his confident tone and the senator's age created just enough hesitation for him to maneuver them toward an alley entrance. A bottle shattered near their feet. "All patricians are the same," someone shouted. "They feast while we starve." "Then starve their sons instead," Atticus called back. "This one has seen 70 winters and walks with a cane. What glory is there in attacking him?" The crowd's momentum faltered, allowing Atticus to half-carry the senator into the narrow alley and away from the temple square. Behind them, the mob found new targets, surging toward the remaining merchants. "My colleagues," the senator gasped as they moved through the darkened streets. "Cornelius and the others." "Had more guards than you," Atticus replied grimly. "They'll manage." By the time they reached the Palatine Hill, the senator's toga was soaked with blood from his head wound. At the villa gates, Rufus and the other guards rushed forward, taking charge of their master and hurrying him inside. Livia stood in the atrium, her face pale with worry. When she saw her father's bloodied form, she rushed forward, hands reaching for him in silent distress. "I'm fine, daughter," the senator assured her weakly. "Just an old man caught in the wrong place. Our new guard brought me home safely." Livia's eyes found Atticus, standing blood-spattered and exhausted by the door. The gratitude in her gaze warmed him more than he cared to admit. 3 days after the riot, Senator Valerius reclined in the tablinum, his head wound bandaged but healing well. The physician had prescribed rest, a luxury the senator could ill afford with the city still simmering with tension. News had arrived that morning that the promised grain ships had finally reached Ostia. The immediate crisis would soon abate. "The Cornelii are pressing for the wedding to proceed as scheduled," Marcus informed his uncle, scrolling through correspondence. "Lucius Cornelius sends his regards and suggests the ceremony take place at their villa instead, given the recent unrest." 15 days, the senator murmured. "It seems so soon." "It's a favorable match, uncle. Few families would overlook Livia's condition for the sake of political alliance." Senator Valerius gazed out toward the garden where Livia sat with her handmaidens, preparing wool for spinning. "I had hoped," he began, then stopped himself. "Never mind what I hoped. Make the arrangements." Across the villa, Atticus had been reassigned to personal guard duty for the senator, a promotion following his actions during the riot. He stood discreetly near the entrance to the tablinum, close enough to protect but far enough to give the appearance of privacy. Since the night he'd rescued the senator, something had shifted in the household. The other guards treated him with grudging respect, and even Gallius acknowledged him with more than curt instructions. Only Marcus seemed displeased with his elevated status. watching him with increasingly suspicious eyes. The senator dismissed Marcus and beckoned Atticus closer. "You risked your life to bring me home safely," he said. "That deserves more recognition than I've given you." "I did my duty, Dominus." "Above and beyond duty." The old man studied him with shrewd eyes. "Titus Aelius speaks highly of your service to his household. He says you're educated, for a Thracian, that you can read and write in both Latin and Greek." Atticus nodded cautiously. "My father was a village scribe before the Romans came. He taught me letters before he was killed." "And then you became a soldier?" "Until Crassus defeated our legion and sold us to the gladiatorial schools." The senator was silent for a moment. "My son, Quintus, always said Rome's greatest failing was wasting the talents of those we conquer." He sighed heavily. "I see Livia has grown comfortable with your presence. Casia tells me you've helped with her nightmares." Atticus remained carefully expressionless. "Only some breathing techniques, Dominus. Nothing improper." "I know." The senator's voice softened. "She hasn't had a restful night since her brother was taken. Whatever you've done has helped her. For that alone, I'm grateful." He straightened in his chair. "The Cornelius wedding approaches. I want you to oversee her security until then. She trusts you, and these are uncertain times." After being dismissed, Atticus found Livia still in the garden. Her handmaidens had departed for the kitchen, leaving her alone with her spinning. Without the presence of others, she set aside her work and reached for her writing tablet. "My father looks better today. Thanks to you. He's a resilient man," Atticus replied. The wedding preparations continue. 15 days remain. Her stylus hesitated over the wax. "I am afraid." "Of Gaius Cornelius?" "Of leaving here. Of never knowing what happened to Quintus. Of living the rest of my life in silence because speaking feels like surrender. Atticus considered her words carefully. Why would speaking be surrender? She wrote quickly, passionately. The last words I spoke begged for my brother's freedom. No one listened. What use are words in a world where truth doesn't matter? Perhaps the right words at the right moment, to the right ears, could still matter, he suggested gently. Livia looked up at him, her eyes searching his face. After a moment, she wrote, "You still speak, after everything you've lost." What? It was a profound question, one that struck at the heart of his survival. "In the arena," he said slowly, "they take everything, your freedom, your dignity, your name. They try to take your humanity. Speaking, even just to myself, was how I remembered I was still a man." Livia's eyes glistened with unshed tears. She began to write something, then stopped and sat down. Her tablet. Instead, she reached into a fold of her stola and withdrew a small object. A tiny clay bird, crudely formed but painted with delicate blue markings. "I made it," Atticus admitted, suddenly self-conscious. "In the kitchen, when the cook wasn't looking. It's a thrush, like the ones that sang in the forests of my homeland." Livia cradled the small bird in her palm, a ghost of a smile touching her lips, the first he had seen from her. She placed it carefully on the bench between them, a fragile token of something neither dared name. From the villa entrance, Marcus Tullius watched the exchange, his expression hardening as he observed the growing intimacy between the silent noblewoman and her scarred protector. The villa hummed with activity as preparations for the Cornelius visit intensified. 10 days remained until the wedding, and the distinguished family would arrive tomorrow to finalize arrangements. Slaves polished silver, arranged fresh flowers, and prepared elaborate dishes to impress their guests. The senator's health had improved enough for him to resume some duties, though he tired easily and often retired to his chambers by midday. In the atrium, Livia sat with a wedding seamstress, enduring fittings for her bridal tunica recta and palla. The traditional straight-woven garment would be cinched with a woolen belt tied in a Hercules knot that only her husband could untie. The symbolism was not lost on her as she stared vacantly while the woman pinned and measured. Atticus maintained a respectful distance, positioned near the impluvium where he could observe the entire room. Their interactions had grown more cautious since Marcus's suspicious glances had become more frequent. Still, they communicated through brief glances and the occasional written message delivered via trusted slaves. The flame-colored veil will complement your complexion beautifully, Domina, the seamstress enthused. Young Master Cornelius will be most pleased. Livia remained expressionless, her hands folded in her lap. When the fitting finally ended, she retreated to the garden, her sanctuary growing more precious as her departure date approached. Later that afternoon, as Atticus patrolled the villa's perimeter, he noticed unusual activity near the senator's private study. The door stood slightly ajar, and hushed voices emanated from within. Approaching quietly, he recognized Marcus's distinctive tenor. "Sure it's suitable?" Marcus was saying. "The Cornelii are particular about such things." "The craftsmanship is impeccable," replied an unfamiliar voice. "Pure silver with cornelian inlays, a worthy gift for your future family connection." Atticus moved away before being discovered, but the exchange lingered in his mind. The senator kept valuable items in his study, family heirlooms, important documents, and a small chest of jewelry intended for Livia's dowry. That evening, as dinner preparations began, Atticus noticed Marcus conversing with a broad-shouldered man near the servants' entrance, a face he recognized from the gladiatorial schools. Taurus, a former fighter from Batiatus's ludus, had gained freedom a year before Atticus. Their eyes met briefly across the courtyard, Taurus's expression unreadable before he disappeared into the kitchen. "What brings a gladiator here?" Atticus asked Demetrius later. "Kitchen staff needed reinforcement for tomorrow's feast," the slave explained. "He's worked for several noble houses since gaining his freedom." The explanation seemed reasonable, yet unease prickled at the back of Atticus's neck. He increased his vigilance, patrolling more frequently near the senator's study and Livia's chambers. Near midnight, a commotion erupted from the direction of the senator's private quarters. Gallius's voice rose in alarm. "Thief! Guards!" Atticus rushed toward the study, arriving simultaneously with Rufus and 2 other guards. Inside, they found the senator's personal strongbox open, several valuable items scattered across the floor. Most notably absent was an ornate silver dagger, a family heirloom featuring the cornelian stone for which the prominent family was named. "Who was last seen near the study?" Rufus demanded of the household slaves gathering in the corridor. "I saw the Thracian guard pass by earlier," offered one of the kitchen slaves, the same one who had been speaking with Marcus earlier. All eyes turned to Atticus. "I was patrolling," he stated calmly. "As is my duty." Senator Valerius appeared, leaning heavily on his cane. "What's happened?" "Theft, Dominus," Rufus reported. "The cornelian dagger is missing along with several valuable items." "Search everyone," the senator ordered, his face grave. "No one leaves until the dagger is found." The search was methodical, starting with the household slaves and proceeding to the guards. When they reached Atticus's small chamber, Taurus was among those conducting the search. The former gladiator overturned the simple pallet and appended the wooden chest containing Atticus's few possessions. "Look here," he exclaimed, reaching beneath the pallet. In his hand gleamed the missing dagger, its silver hilt inlaid with distinctive red cornelian stones. Atticus stared in disbelief. "That's not mine. I've never seen it before." "It was under your sleeping pallet," Rufus stated coldly. "Along with these." He held up several gold coins and a small pearl earring belonging to the senator's late wife, all reportedly missing from the strongbox. "I didn't take them," Atticus insisted, meeting the senator's disappointed gaze. "I'm being framed." Marcus appeared at his uncle's shoulder. Who would bother framing a former slave? What could anyone possibly gain? "Search Taurus," Atticus demanded, "and ask why a kitchen slave recognized me from the ludus." "Desperate accusations," Marcus said smoothly. "Typical of the guilty." Senator Valerius's expression hardened. "I welcomed you into my household, trusted you with my daughter's safety, and this is how you repay that trust?" Before Atticus could respond, Roman guards appeared at the villa entrance, summoned by Marcus without the senator's knowledge. "A thief has been caught with family treasures," Marcus informed them. including a priceless heirloom intended as a gift for the Cornelius family, who arrive tomorrow to finalize wedding arrangements. The guards seized Atticus, binding his hands with practiced efficiency. "Take him to the holding cells," their captain ordered. "He'll face the praetor's justice in the morning." As they dragged him from the villa, Atticus caught a final glimpse of Livia standing at her chamber door, her face pale with shock. Behind her, Marcus smiled with the satisfaction of a man who had eliminated a significant obstacle. Dawn broke over Rome, casting long shadows across the forum as the Cornelius family's procession wound its way toward the Valerius villa. 8 litter-bearers strained under the weight of Lucius Cornelius, while his son Gaius rode in a separate, equally ostentatious conveyance. Behind them trailed an entourage of slaves bearing gifts and personal belongings for their 3-day stay. Inside the villa, the atmosphere was tense despite the festive decorations. Senator Valerius had barely slept, troubled by Atticus's arrest and the impending visit. He had trusted the Thracian, had seen something honorable in him despite his scarred appearance and violent past. The evidence, however, seemed irrefutable. "The praetor will hear the case tomorrow," Marcus informed him over a simple breakfast. "I've arranged for the Cornelian dagger to be returned in time for the presentation ceremony this evening." "And if he's innocent?" the senator asked quietly. Marcus looked genuinely surprised. "The dagger was under his sleeping pallet, uncle, along with other missing items. Who else could have taken them?" "Who indeed?" the senator murmured, his eyes distant. In her chambers, Livia sat motionless as Casia arranged her hair for the Cornelii's arrival. The handmaiden worked in silence, noting her mistress's unusual pallor and the dark circles beneath her eyes. "The Thracian will face the praetor's justice," Casia said finally, testing the waters. "If guilty, he'll be fortunate to escape with a flogging rather than execution, having stolen from a senator." Livia's hands tightened in her lap, but her expression remained carefully neutral. "Though some in the household whisper that it seems unlike him," Casia continued cautiously. "Demetrius says he refused a purse of gold from Senator Cornelius himself after the riot, a reward for saving you, Dominus." At this, Livia reached for her tablet and wrote quickly, "*the dagger. What did it look like? Silver with red stones," Casia replied. "A family heirloom, they say." "Who found it?" "The new kitchen slave, I believe. The broad one with the broken nose." Livia's stylus moved rapidly. "The one who arrived with Marcus yesterday?" Casia's eyes widened slightly as she made the connection. "Yes, Domina." Livia rose suddenly, crossing to the small chest where she kept her personal belongings. From it, she withdrew the tiny clay bird Atticus had made for her and the toy soldier he had found in the garden. She held them for a moment, then tucked them into a hidden pocket in her stola. The sounds of the Cornelius procession reached them. Slaves calling orders, the clatter of litters being set down, Marcus's voice raised in formal greeting. Livia's hands trembled slightly as she took up her writing tablet once more. "I need to visit the Temple of Vesta. Now? But the Cornelii have just arrived. Religious obligation. Before my wedding. It cannot wait. Casia looked uncertain. Your father expected you to greet your betrothed. Tell them I am preparing a special offering to the household gods. I will return before the evening meal. I cannot let you go alone, Domina. Especially not with the city still unsettled. Then accompany me. But we must go now, while everyone is distracted with the arrival. Using the servants' entrance, Livia and Casia slipped away from the villa as the Cornelius family was being formally received in the atrium. Instead of heading directly to the Temple of Vesta, however, Livia led them toward the forum's edge where the city praetor maintained his offices and the holding cells for those awaiting trial. Domina, this is not the way to the temple, Casia protested. Livia's expression was resolute as she wrote, I must see him. I must know the truth, This is madness, Casia whispered. If your father discovers, then make sure he doesn't discover it. The holding cells were dank and dimly lit, guarded by bored-looking men who straightened when they saw a noblewoman approaching. Livia kept her head high, her bearing aristocratic despite her simple dress. On her tablet, she wrote a message and showed it to the head guard. I am Livia Valeria, daughter of Senator Valerius. I wish to see the Thracian prisoner brought from our household. The thief? The guard asked, surprised. Why would a noble lady wish to see such a man? Livia wrote again. To recover information about other stolen items before his trial. The guard hesitated, then shrugged. 5 minutes only. And your slave stays outside. Kasia squeezed Livia's arm in warning, but the young woman's determination was unshakable. Following the guard down a narrow corridor, she steeled herself against the smells of unwashed bodies and human waste. Atticus sat on a stone bench in a small cell, his hands chained before him. When he saw Livia, he rose quickly, disbelief evident in his expression. Domina, he said quietly. You shouldn't be here. The guard unlocked the cell door. 5 minutes, he reminded Livia before retreating to a respectful distance. Livia entered, her writing tablet clutched tightly in her hands. When she was certain the guard couldn't see her writing, she quickly scratched, Tell me truly. Did you take the dagger? No, Atticus replied without hesitation. I would never betray your father's trust. Or yours. I believe you, she wrote rapidly. The man who found it came with Marcus yesterday. A former gladiator, Taurus, Atticus confirmed. We trained under the same lanista. He was always for sale to the highest bidder, even in the ludus. The praetor's court would convene at midday tomorrow. In the holding cell, Livia and Atticus had precious little time to speak before the guard would return. Her stylus moved frantically across the wax tablet. How can I help you? You can't, Atticus said gently. Return to your father's house. Forget me. The evidence is overwhelming, and Marcus has powerful allies in the courts. I will not accept this injustice. Her dark eyes flashed with determination. What would you do? You don't speak. And even if you did, the word of a former gladiator against the nephew of a senator. Atticus shook his head. Some fights cannot be won, Domina. All those arena battles, and now you surrender without fighting? The challenge in her written words made him flinch. This isn't the arena. There are no rules here, no chance for victory through skill or strength. This is politics, a game I don't know how to play. Livia's expression softened. She wrote slowly, I know this game. I've watched it all my life. My father, my brother. I've seen how Rome's justice works. The guard's footsteps approached. Time's up, he called. Livia quickly wrote one last message. The praetor. Who is presiding? Marcus Porcius, Atticus replied. Why? A flash of recognition crossed her face as she wrote. My father once did him a great service. I have a plan, Before Atticus could respond, the guard appeared to escort Livia out. She turned back once, her eyes conveying what her silence could not, a promise. Outside, Kasia waited anxiously. We must return quickly, Domina. Your absence will soon be noticed. But instead of heading toward the Palatine, Livia led them deeper into the Forum, stopping only when they reached the Temple of Vesta. The Vestal Virgins, Rome's most revered priestesses, maintained the eternal flame and held unique status among women, independence, legal rights, and significant influence. At the temple entrance, Livia wrote a message for the attending priestess. I seek guidance before my wedding. And a message delivered with absolute discretion. The Vestal, an older woman named Cecilia, studied Livia thoughtfully before nodding. Come. Inside the temple's private chambers, Livia explained through written messages what had transpired, her suspicions about Marcus, and her need to reach Praetor Porcius before tomorrow's trial. Your father saved the praetor's son from drowning years ago, Cecilia confirmed. A debt acknowledged but never repaid. She considered the young noblewoman carefully. But what evidence do you have of this man's innocence? Livia hesitated, then wrote, only my conviction. And knowledge of my cousin's character, Not enough for a Roman court, Cecilia said gently. You need proof. Or, Livia prompted. or testimony so compelling it overrides the physical evidence. The Vestal studied Livia intently. You haven't spoken in 3 years, since your brother's exile. What if you were to break your silence in the praetor's court? Such a dramatic act from a senator's daughter would carry significant weight. Livia's hand trembled slightly as she wrote, *, my voice feels foreign to me now. I'm not sure I remember how to use it, *. Then practice, Cecilia said simply. Here in private. If you wish to save this man, you must find your voice again. That evening, while the Cornelius family was entertained in the triclinium of the Valerius villa, Livia secluded herself in her chambers, claiming a headache. Casia stood guard outside, ensuring her privacy as, for the first time in 3 years, Livia attempted to form words. Her first efforts produced only rough whispers, her vocal cords stiff from disuse. Atticus, she struggled, the name emerging as little more than a rasp. Again and again she tried, her throat aching with the effort, tears of frustration gathering in her eyes. Meanwhile, in the holding cells beneath the forum, Atticus sat with his back against the damp stone wall. Without windows, he could only guess at the passage of time. Tomorrow he would face the praetor's justice, almost certainly a death sentence for a former slave who stole from a senator. The irony wasn't lost on him. Freedom, so briefly tasted, would end at the executioner's hand rather than in the arena. He thought of Livia's determined expression, the challenge in her written words. What plan could she possibly have? And why would she risk her family's standing to help him? In the shadows of his cell, he allowed himself to acknowledge what he had been denying for weeks, that the connection between them had grown into something dangerous and profound. Across the city, a messenger from the Temple of Vesta delivered a sealed scroll to Praetor Marcus Porcius's private residence. The message inside, written in the elegant hand of a Vestal virgin, requested a private audience before tomorrow's court session regarding a matter of justice and an old debt. In her bedchamber, Livia continued her solitary struggle, forcing sound through years of chosen silence. By midnight, her efforts had produced a rough approximation of speech, halting and barely audible, but words nonetheless. She practiced the essential phrases again and again, preparing for what would be either Atticus's salvation or her own public humiliation. On her dressing table sat the small clay bird he had made for her, a reminder of what was at stake. Beside it lay her bridal veil, delivered that afternoon for the final fitting, the symbol of a future she increasingly could not bear to contemplate. The praetor's court assembled in a modest basilica near the forum, a rectangular hall with raised platforms at either end, one for the magistrate, the other for witnesses and evidence. Citizens of all classes filled the central space, eager to witness the day's proceedings. Justice in Rome was public spectacle, entertainment as much as civic duty. Praetor Marcus Porcius, a stern man in his 60s with the bearing of a former military commander, presided from his curule chair. Before him, a large stone block, the witness stone, stood ready for those giving testimony to touch while swearing to the truth of their statements. Senator Valerius arrived with Marcus Tullius, their expressions grave as they took seats near the front. The senator appeared reluctant, his duty to prosecute his former guard clearly weighing heavily upon him. Behind them, several household slaves had been brought as witnesses, including Rufus and the kitchen slave Taurus. The Cornelius family had declined to attend, citing the impropriety of witnessing such sordid business before a wedding celebration. Their absence was conspicuous, their disapproval implied. Livia had not appeared at the villa that morning, having spent the night at the Temple of Vesta under Cecilia's guidance. The senator assumed she was observing pre-wedding rituals, a small comfort in the midst of the household's disgrace. Guards brought Atticus into the court, his hands bound before him. Though the holding cells had left him disheveled, he maintained his dignity, standing straight-backed before the praetor. His eyes scanned the crowd briefly, searching for Livia but finding no sign of her. Atticus of Thrace, Praetor Porcius began, you stand accused of theft from the household of Senator Gaius Valerius. The items in question include a silver dagger of significant value, gold coins, and jewelry. How do you plead? Not guilty, Praetor, Atticus replied clearly. I have been falsely accused. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Few defendants, especially former slaves, dared to directly contradict such damning evidence. Marcus Tullius rose to present the case against Atticus. Honored praetor, the facts are simple and indisputable. The accused had access to my uncle's private study due to his position as household guard. The stolen items were found in his sleeping quarters, hidden beneath his pallet. The silver dagger alone is worth more than he would earn in 5 years of service, a temptation too great for one of his background to resist. The praetor nodded thoughtfully. Senator Valerius, you vouched for this man's character when you hired him. Have you any statement to make? The senator rose slowly, leaning on his cane. I believed him to be honorable, praetor. His actions during the recent unrest saved my life. I'm perplexed by this betrayal. And yet the evidence is clear, Marcus interjected smoothly. Perhaps the Thracian's arena training made him adept at deception as well as combat. Rufus was called to testify next, touching the witness stone as he described the search of Atticus's quarters and the discovery of the stolen items. Taurus followed, claiming to have seen Atticus near the senator's study at unusual hours. The prosecution has presented its case, the praetor announced. Does the accused wish to offer a defense? Atticus stepped forward. I have served Senator Valerius loyally. I had no need to steal, my needs were met, my position secure. I believe I was framed by someone who wished to remove me from the household. A convenient claim, Marcus scoffed. And do you have evidence of this alleged conspiracy? Only the timing, Atticus replied. The theft occurred just before the Cornelius family's arrival to finalize wedding arrangements with the senator's daughter. The praetor frowned. You suggest a connection between your arrest and Domina Livia's betrothal? On what basis? Before Atticus could respond, a stir at the basilica's entrance drew all eyes. 2 Vestal virgins entered, their presence immediately commanding respect. Between them walked a veiled figure in a simple white stola. Livia. She moved with purpose toward the witness area, the crowd parting before the Vestal's authority. When she reached the front of the court, she removed her veil, revealing her pale face and resolute expression. Marcus half rose from his seat. My cousin has no place in these proceedings. She cannot speak to offer testimony. She has requested to be heard, Cecilia, the elder Vestal, announced. And by the authority granted to our order, we have brought her before this court. The praetor studied Livia with interest. Domina Valeria, you wish to give testimony in this matter? How will you communicate your thoughts to the court? All eyes were on Livia as she approached the witness stone. Her fingers trembled slightly as she placed them on its smooth surface. The basilica fell completely silent, the spectators holding their breath in anticipation. For 3 years, Livia Valeria had maintained her silence, a protest against a world that had failed to hear her when it mattered most. Now, with Atticus's life hanging in the balance, she lifted her chin and parted her lips. I will speak, she said, her voice a raspy whisper that nonetheless carried in the hushed courtroom. I will speak the truth. Gasps erupted from the crowd. Senator Valerius staggered to his feet, his face a mask of shock. Marcus's expression transformed from confidence to alarm in an instant. The water clock marking the court's time dripped steadily as the praetor leaned forward, his interest clearly piqued by this unexpected development. Proceed, Domina Valeria, he said. The court will hear you. The silence in the basilica was absolute as Livia stood before the witness stone. Her first words in 3 years hung in the air, their impact rippling through the crowd like a stone dropped into still water. The water clock on the praetor's table marked each precious second as she gathered her strength for what would come next. Domina Valeria, Praetor Porcius prompted gently, you have chosen to break your silence today. The court acknowledges the significance of this act. Please, tell us what you know of this matter. Livia's throat felt raw, unused muscles protesting as she forced them to work again. Atticus, she began, the name familiar on her tongue from her night of practice, is innocent. Her voice was raspy but audible, each word carefully formed as if she were learning to speak anew. In truth, she was. The theft was arranged by my cousin, Marcus Tullius. She pointed to where Marcus sat, his face now drained of color. He brought a former gladiator, Taurus, to our household the day before the items disappeared. These are outrageous accusations. Marcus sputtered, rising to his feet. My cousin has not spoken in years. Clearly her mind has been affected. She cannot be considered a reliable witness. Silence, the praetor commanded. The court will hear her testimony in full. He turned back to Livia. Continue, Domina. What evidence supports your claim? Livia took a deep breath, using the techniques Atticus had taught her to calm her racing heart. I saw them speaking, in the servants' quarters. Taurus knew Atticus from the ludus. They trained under the same lanista. Many gladiators know each other, Marcus interrupted. That proves nothing. The praetor silenced him with a stern look before addressing Livia again. Domina, while your decision to speak is extraordinary, we require more than suspicion to overturn the physical evidence. The timing, Livia continued, her voice growing slightly stronger with use. Why would Atticus steal now? After saving my father during the riots? After earning his trust? She turned to face her father directly. He refused reward money from Cornelius after rescuing you. Demetrius can confirm this. Senator Valerius nodded slowly, realization dawning in his eyes. Furthermore, Livia continued, the theft occurred just before the Cornelius family's arrival. Their disapproval of the scandal would hasten my marriage arrangements, benefiting Marcus, who becomes father's heir once I leave our household. The court erupted in murmurs as the implications became clear. Marcus rose again, his composure cracking. This is absurd. The gladiator has clearly manipulated my cousin, perhaps even seduced her. You will watch your accusations, Marcus Tullius, the praetor warned. This is a senator's daughter standing before the court. Livia's eyes flashed with sudden fire. I have not spoken for 3 years because I learned that words mean nothing in Rome when power decides truth. When my brother was falsely accused, my pleas were ignored. Her voice grew stronger with each word, fueled by long-suppressed rage. I chose silence as protest. Today I break it not for myself, but for justice. She withdrew the small scroll from the folds of her stola, her brother's letter from Rhodes. My brother wrote that someone close to our family betrayed him. Someone who stood to gain from his removal. She handed the letter to the praetor. The handwriting matches samples in my father's archives. Marcus lunged forward. That letter is a fabrication. The seal is authentic, the praetor observed, examining it carefully. And dated from the appropriate time of Quintus Valerius's exile. Turning to the senator, Livia spoke directly to her father for the first time in 3 years. Marcus arranged my brother's false accusation. Now he attempts the same with Atticus. Both stood between him and what he truly desires, your estate, father. Senator Valerius rose shakily, his eyes never leaving his daughter's face. Livia, your voice. Examine Taurus more carefully, she continued, addressing the praetor again. And the Cornelian dagger. I believe you'll find Marcus's fingerprints on this entire scheme. The praetor gestured for his assistant. Bring the witness Taurus forward again. And summon the senator's slave Demetrius for questioning. Marcus, seeing his carefully constructed plan unraveling, made a desperate move. This is a waste of the court's time. The evidence against the Thracian is clear. What is clear, the praetor interrupted, is that this case has unexpected complexity. Given the serious nature of Domina Valeria's counteraccusations and the extraordinary circumstance of her broken silence, I order Taurus held for questioning and the evidence re-examined. He turned to Atticus. The accused will remain in custody until this matter is resolved. But given the new testimony, I suspend judgment pending further investigation. Livia's legs trembled with exhaustion, the effort of speaking after so long having drained her strength. Yet her eyes sought Atticus, finding him staring at her with undisguised wonder. In that moment, something unspoken passed between them, a recognition of what her sacrifice meant. As court officials led Marcus away for questioning, the praetor beckoned Senator Valerius forward. Your daughter's testimony carries great weight, given the personal cost at which it comes. I suggest you examine your household affairs more carefully, old friend. The senator could only nod, his eyes still fixed on Livia as she was supported by the Vestal virgins. His silent daughter had found her voice at last, and the truth it spoke would shake his family to its foundations. 3 days after the dramatic court hearing, Atticus stood once again before Praetor Porcius. This time, however, his hands were unbound, and he faced the magistrate not as a criminal but as a free man awaiting formal exoneration. "The evidence is conclusive," the praetor announced to the assembled court. "Taurus has confessed to planting the stolen items in the accused quarters at the direction of Marcus Tullius. Furthermore, examination of the Cornelian dagger revealed finger marks inconsistent with the accused hands but matching those of Marcus Tullius himself." Atticus remained stoic as the praetor continued, though inside, relief coursed through him like a cool stream after drought. "This court finds Atticus of Thrace innocent of all charges. The chains of false accusation are hereby broken." With a ceremonial gesture, the praetor snapped a pair of symbolic chains placed on the judgment table. "You are free to go with the court's apologies for your unjust detention." Outside the basilica, Senator Valerius waited with several household slaves. The old man's face was deeply lined with fatigue and distress, the events of recent days having taken a visible toll. "Atticus," he said formally, "I owe you an apology. I was too quick to believe the evidence against you." "You followed the law, Dominus," Atticus replied. "As a Roman should." The senator gestured to a small purse held by Demetrius. "Compensation for your wrongful imprisonment. And," he hesitated, "your position in my household remains open, should you wish to return." Atticus was silent for a moment. "And Marcus Tullius?" "My nephew has been taken to the imperial prison while the praetor investigates his possible involvement in my son's case." The senator's voice cracked slightly. "If evidence confirms Livia's accusations, he will face severe punishment for his actions against both you and Quintus." "And the Cornelius wedding?" The senator sighed heavily. "Postponed indefinitely. Lucius Cornelius was displeased by the scandal, though I suspect his son's greater disappointment was losing the dowry lands rather than losing Livia herself." They walked in silence through the forum, each man lost in his thoughts. Finally, the senator spoke again, his voice softer. "She has not stopped speaking since the trial. After 3 years of silence, it's as if a dam has broken. She asks for you daily." Atticus kept his expression carefully neutral. "How is her voice?" "Stronger each day, though still rough from disuse. The physician says it will recover fully with time and practice." The senator stopped walking, turning to face Atticus directly. "She risked everything to save you. Her reputation, her arranged marriage, the silence that had become her protection. Why would she do that for a household guard she has known mere weeks?" The question hung between them, laden with implications neither man could comfortably address. "Perhaps," Atticus said carefully, "she values justice above all else. As her father taught her." The senator studied him for a long moment. "Perhaps," he agreed, though his tone suggested he recognized the evasion. "Come. She waits at home." At the villa, everything had changed. The festive decorations for the wedding had been removed, and several slaves who had been loyal to Marcus had been sold to other households. Rufus met them at the entrance, offering Atticus a respectful nod that would have been unthinkable weeks earlier. "The Gladiator returns, victorious again," he said, with something approaching admiration. "Former Gladiator," Atticus corrected, a ghost of a smile crossing his scarred face. In the peristylium garden, Livia sat beneath the almond tree, a scroll open on her lap. When she saw Atticus, she rose quickly, a smile transforming her usually solemn features. "Atticus," she said, her voice still raspy but gaining strength. "You're free." "Thanks to you, Domina," he replied, bowing his head slightly. Senator Valerius watched their interaction with shrewd eyes. "I have matters to attend to in my study," he announced. "Atticus, we will discuss your return to duties tomorrow." With that diplomatic retreat, he left them alone in the garden, though undoubtedly with slaves watching discreetly from a distance. When they were relatively private, Livia stepped closer. "I wasn't sure you would return." "Nor was I," Atticus admitted. But I had unfinished business here. The breathing lessons? She asked with a small smile. Among other things. His eyes held hers steadily. Your voice suits you, Domina. It has the same strength as your written words. She touched her throat self-consciously. It feels strange still. Like wearing someone else's clothes. She paused, then added, I've written to Rhodes. If Marcus truly arranged my brother's false accusation, there may be hope for his return. Your father must be pleased. He weeps each time I speak to him, she admitted. 3 years of silence ended because of you. Because of your courage, Atticus corrected. I merely gave you a reason to find your voice again. From a fold in her stola, Livia withdrew something familiar, the small clay bird he had made for her. This reminded me that even broken things can still have wings, she said softly. As the afternoon light filtered through the almond branches, casting dappled shadows across their faces, the distance between them, freeman and noblewoman, gladiator and senator's daughter, seemed simultaneously vast and insignificant. Spring blossomed into summer across Rome. In the garden of the Valerius villa, new growth transformed the space where so much had changed over the past months. Herbs flourished in freshly turned beds, rosemary, thyme, and mint releasing their fragrance with each breeze. Livia knelt beside a young lavender plant, carefully patting soil around its base. The southern exposure suits them, Atticus observed, approaching with a watering vessel. They remind me of the hillsides in Thrace. Tell me about your homeland again, Livia said, her voice now clear and melodious after weeks of daily use. Her silence had become a distant memory, though she still chose her words with care, valuing them in a way few Romans did. Atticus smiled as he knelt beside her, close but maintaining the proper distance their positions still required. Though reinstated as a household guard, his role had subtly shifted. The senator had assigned him as Livia's personal protector, a position that allowed them time together that would otherwise be impossible. It was nothing like Rome, he replied. Small villages nestled in green valleys. Sheep grazing on hillsides. My father taught me letters by firelight after long days tending our small plot of land. Before the Romans came, she said softly. Before the Romans came, he agreed without bitterness. Time had taught him that dwelling on lost pasts served no purpose. But without that path, I would never have found myself here. A comfortable silence fell between them as they worked side by side among the herbs. They had developed a rhythm over the weeks, knowing when to speak and when silence communicated more clearly than words ever could. From the villa came the sound of animated conversation. Senator Valerius's health had improved dramatically since receiving correspondence from Rhodes confirming his son's potential return. With Marcus's confession and evidence of his forgeries, the emperor had been persuaded to review Quintus's case. The family expected him home before winter. Father received another letter this morning, Livia said, brushing soil from her hands. The praetor has formally stripped Marcus of his citizenship. He'll be exiled to Britannia, far from any position of influence. Justice comes full circle, Atticus observed. Not always, Livia replied. But in this case, yes. She hesitated, then added, the Cornelii have withdrawn completely. Father says I may choose my own path now. Atticus kept his eyes on the herbs, not trusting himself to maintain composure if he looked at her. A rare privilege for a Roman woman. Indeed. She moved slightly closer. I've been thinking about what that path might be. Before she could continue, Demetrius appeared at the garden entrance. Domina, your father requests your presence. A messenger has arrived from the port with news of importance. Livia rose quickly, excitement lighting her features. Perhaps word of Quintus's ship? As she hurried toward the villa, Atticus remained in the garden, contemplating the herb beds they had created together. Though he had found a place of respect in the Valerius household, he harbored no illusions about the future. Rome's social boundaries remained rigid, particularly for one born outside its empire's heart. When Livia returned an hour later, her expression was complex, joy mixed with something like resolution. Quintus has landed at Ostia, she announced. He'll be home within days. That's wonderful news, Domina. There's more. She sat beside him on the marble bench. Father has received an offer of service from the governor of Sicily. They seek an educated man to oversee agricultural projects, someone who understands both Roman administration and farming. Father recommended Quintus for the position once his citizenship is restored. Atticus nodded, unsure why she shared these family matters with him. Sicily needs more than administrators, she continued. They need people who understand cultivation, irrigation systems. Father mentioned that many freedmen find opportunity there, away from Rome's prejudices. Her eyes met his directly. He specifically mentioned you. Understanding dawned slowly. Your father wishes me to accompany your brother to Sicily? My father, Livia said deliberately, wishes for his daughter's happiness. He has observed us these past weeks with greater wisdom than we credited him. She took a deep breath. I will be joining Quintus in Sicily, as his administrative assistant and interpreter of Greek. The implication hung between them, a possibility neither had dared voice aloud. Sicily is not Rome, she said softly. Its social customs are more flexible, particularly in the countryside. Atticus finally allowed himself to look directly into her eyes. What are you saying, Livia? She reached for his hand, a gesture that would scandalize Roman society but felt as natural as breathing. I'm saying that perhaps we both have new paths to discover. Together, if you wish it. I wish it more than freedom itself, he admitted, his voice rough with emotion. Livia smiled, then spoke a word he'd never heard from her lips before. Cardia, she said carefully, the Thracian word he had taught her weeks ago. Beloved. In the garden they had planted together, surrounded by herbs that would heal and flourish long after they departed Rome, Atticus leaned forward and kissed her, gently, briefly, a promise of what might grow in a land far from the city that had both imprisoned and ultimately freed them both.